and welcome to this panel discussion on monetizing AI, how operators can unlock new service revenue with conversational AI in IMS. So that's the topic. We're here on the Mavenir stand at MWC, and joining me we have Deniz Celik of Turkcell. Next to her is Brandon Larson of Mavenir, and next to him is Amy Cameron of STL Partners. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
And welcome to the online audience as well. So the topic today, operators are entering an era where AI is not just about efficiency, it's not just that simple productivity tool, it's potentially a strategic engine for growing service revenues as well. So one of the most promising service use cases is having AI in IMS, essentially, combining the two. And that potentially could help operators differentiate from alternative solutions out there. So that is potentially the opportunity. So we're going to talk about that, and we're also going to talk a little bit about deploying AI at scale in mobile networks. So hopefully I've set the scene for you there. Amy, we're going to talk first about the strategic opportunity, and particularly around combining conversational AI and IMS, essentially. So frame that for us.
Okay, so I've done a little bit of quick scan of the internet before we started to find out how much voice traffic is there. Roughly 23 trillion minutes of voice traffic in 2023, and that goes up and down depending on how useful voice is. But I think that by integrating AI into voice, this is, sure, we've all learned how to message and text and everything, but it's much easier to speak than it is to write. And so I think that if we can bring the capabilities that we have from generative AI into voice, that's easy to use. It's right on your doorstep, and there is a lot of voice traffic on which to apply it.
Well, you only have to walk around the show here to see how many people are actually on the phone, right? So there's still a lot of voice communication. Yeah, Brandon, building on that, how do you see this opportunity?
Well, when we talk a lot of operators, voice is still king, right? That's a bread and butter of their service. And what they're really looking to do is say, how can I add more value to my customers? What problems do my customers experience that I can solve with AI in the voice channel? And we'll talk a little bit later about the use cases, but as we start talking to a lot of our operators, there are a lot of problems that are experienced in day-to-day voice communications that AI can solve. And then I'll tee it up here for Deniz to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, let's hear about this from Turkcell's perspective. Deniz, what are you thinking?
Yeah, actually voice is always there. As Amy said, the number of minutes is increasing, and nobody is just giving up talking on the phone. So it's very important still, even data is increasing. In the meanwhile, independence from apps and technologies is critical from operator view. Because with AI there are many opportunities to use via apps, via other things, etc. But what I see with IMS AI, it can enable the operators and users to increase the customer experience better with native experience. So that's the most critical area I can say as the operator.
Yeah, okay, well let's drill down a little bit on that and how essentially operators can differentiate from other services in the market. So Amy, what's the value of having AI integrated into the network in this way?
Yeah, well, I mean, from a user experience, it's great. It's easy, right? All you have to do is make your phone call and it's there, right? We all have too many apps on our phones. You don't want to, keep up with the software. Like if you can make it completely frictionless for the end user, then you substantially increase the likelihood of anybody using the thing. And so, I mean, I think that is really the best thing for operators, because there are so few domains where operators can innovate, where it is really, truly their core. This is what they own. This is what they do. And this is one of the domains where they can do that. And so I think it's great because it's not just that it's easy, but it's also that customers can see operators innovating in a way that they will associate directly to the operator.
So this mantra we've had, there's an app for that. In future, there might be, you don't need an app for that, right?
Exactly.
Okay, now interesting. Brandon, just building on that, obviously there are, let's say, a lot of OTT solutions out there, and potentially using AI.
Yeah.
What advantage will operators have over those?
Well, I'm going to pick up on what Amy said about the frictionless part, right? People adopt services because they're easy to use. And as Amy said, you just make a phone call and you start a phone call. And the difference with OTT apps is that you have to say, hey, does that other person have that OTT app? Or it doesn't work. Do I have to download the OTT app? So it's all that friction from devices doing taps, have to have the right device, or the other person has the OTT app. That's friction.
Yeah.
With operators, they could just say, it just works. Just hit that native dialer, speak to it like you'd speak to an Alexa or a Siri, say, hey, whatever, I want you to do this, and you activate the AI on the call. It's that friction part. You make the service frictionless, people use it. And I do think operators have a structural advantage in doing that, and the service is just going to be a better user experience than an OTT app or a device.
So this is key, that you don't have to worry about what the other party has in their conversation.
Well, think about it. It's friction. If I'm going to do translate, I'm like, well, they have to have the OTT app, and do I call them on the native dialer? Do I call them? That's anxiety when you're trying to communicate with somebody. You got to start thinking like, what are all these conditions that I have to meet to get the people don't want to do that. They just want it to work. Hit the green button, it works.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit about the competitive dynamics in Turkey. What sort of competition are you facing, particularly, well, both from other operators and from OTT applications?
Yeah, it's very rough, we can say. In Turkey, we are at the edge of 5G launch countrywide. We will launch in 1st of April. So after that, with 5G, NSA and other stuff, time will come to the monetization side. So monetization and customer experience improvement, because nobody will really know about the difference between the Gs, but we will have to let the operators and the customers enhance their experience with such services. So that's the critical point for us.
So yeah, it's interesting how you're potentially positioning 5G. So will conversational AI be part of that positioning, do you think?
Hopefully, we'll see it. We have started to work on it. Yeah.
Okay, now let's talk a little bit about some of the use cases here. We you started to touch on them earlier, but Amy, begin with you. How could we use this technology?
Well, I mean, I think we have a launch already. I'm sure lots of people have seen the T-Mobile live translation, and so let's point at it because it's there and everybody's seen it. And I've heard anecdotally from people in the show ask, who've used it in the States, it works really well. I asked them, what about latency? And said, it's fine, it works well. So I think that, it is there, and the translation is a great starting point because we already know that is one thing that AI is for. We understand it.
So, and these are objective end users, not T-Mobile people saying it works well. These are
no. This was not somebody who worked for T-Mobile. This is somebody who works for a completely different company. And I asked him, we were talking about it, and I said to him, oh, have you tried it? And he said, yeah, it's great. He's Indian. I think he was using it with family, so
okay, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So obviously translation is massive, and it is an important use case, but there's use cases beyond translation?
There are. I think translation is the one we've seen the most market traction in because there are people with limited language proficiencies in all countries, and there's important phone calls to be made, so we see a huge appetite for that. Another one is an AI receptionist. So for very small businesses where they're cutting hair or cooking the pizza or fixing the car, and they need to be doing that, not answering the phone all day, right? So they need those customers to keep coming in. They need to keep booking appointments, completing the work, and they don't have the money to pay a virtual receptionist type of business. So that's another good use case. And then we see a lot around security. Fraud, scam, it's a big thing. People get defrauded. So being able to pick up those scams that are coming through AI-generated voice, being able to sample that voice in the network with AI, add to that fraud signal, catch more fraud in the network and crowdsource it, we think there's a lot of value there too.
So that is AI fighting AI?
That is AI fighting, fight fire with fire.
Right, okay. And sorry, just very quickly on how that works. So the AI picks up that this is an AI voice signature, essentially?
It could, and what we do is we put the AI listening to potential fraud calls. So right now a lot of the fraud is, we look at signaling patterns in the network and we determine like that's probably fraud, but maybe it's like 78, 80% type of thing. And we're like, well, let's listen in, and then we can analyze the voice for like what they're saying, and then we can pick up if that's voice cloning. That adds to that fraud signal to go, that's probably fraud. So now we're at about 98%. That's a fraudulent call, and then that feeds back in, and we can identify the fraudsters better and earlier.
Yeah. Sounds like we're going to need that actually. So
yeah, we will.
Deniz, let's talk a little bit about in Turkey the key use cases for you. Is translation going to be a big one in your market?
Yeah, it can be one of the use cases that will work. I think the best thing is that Brandon is always telling us, just imagine we can do everything. I think best thing is that part. Every market will be different. Every operator will be different. Every customer will be different. So it started with T-Mobile. We will evaluate if it fits or not. But other use cases can be also just okay for us in the future with the 5G launch. So
Yeah.
it's imagine and go ahead.
Okay, I'm sure more use cases will emerge
Yeah,
as we
exactly.
experiment with the technology as well. Let's talk a bit about how you do this. I'm going to start with you, Brandon, because I'm guessing there will be challenges. There always are challenges in the telecoms industry. Got a lot of legacy infrastructure, etc. If a telecoms operator is starting from scratch here, what do they need to think about?
Well, I mean, the first thing when you're putting AI in the network, first thing we ran into is service interaction. So when you dial a call today, you got conferencing, call forwarding, you have all those services that exist today. So as we put AI services in, we have to blend those two user experiences together, right? So that's the service interaction. And probably the second challenge that we see popping up is around regulatory. So take the translations use case. People are putting AI regulation in different states, different countries, and one of the things we see cropping up a little bit is consent. In some countries it said, hey, you have to basically say this call is being translated, you have to collect the consent before you allow the AI to happen. So that's something that we're going to have to stay ahead of as an industry. The regulations kind of are going to be moving fast in AI, and we need to keep pace with them.
Do you, sorry, just on that, do you actively need to ask permission, or do you just need to let them know?
In some countries, you have to collect the consent. Not all countries, so it's different. It's kind of a patchwork of regulation, and I think that's going to be the challenge. Some of it is just like, we would announce that the translation's happening. That's a good user experience. Let the person know that AI is going to translate the call so you don't surprise them. But then there's a regulatory aspect of that. From some countries will ask you to say you have to collect consent before you do that to our subscriber base. I think Germany was one of them.
Got it.
I was just going to add, I think on the implementation side, there's obviously the technology, but then there's the commercial model, and I think a lot of operators struggle with that, and it's going to be a difficult choice, right? Because you look at the US example, like, it's really difficult now to monetize translation on the consumer market other than through retention or acquisition, right? Because T-Mobile is not charging for this. In some markets you might be able to charge, in some markets you won't. And so I think there's a big piece of work for operators to think about, obviously it's all geared towards revenue generation. How are you going to generate that revenue? And in one instance, can you add a little bit more? Like that concierge service is, more something you pay for. Is there a way that you can actually monetize the translation piece with enterprises? So I think that's going to be a challenge as well in implementation.
Yeah, on that, do you think there's some kind of freemium models that might work in this case, where you get a certain amount of translation for free, and then if you're using it a lot, then you pay? That kind of model.
Yeah, maybe that might work, or maybe it's more you just monetize through your enterprise customers. So you think about like where translation is going to be most heavily used. It's going to be like from the hospitality sector potentially, where they have a lot of people traveling from abroad, or in customer care, and you seek to monetize on one side of the conversation in particular.
Let's get Deniz's view on that, because you're going to ask yourself this question going forward. How do you see yourselves monetizing this?
For the monetizing side, I think it should be worked out more because it's very new. Operators usually don't know how to monetize and how to make a plan, but it really has a potential there. So we have to work on the market needs and just enhance with the other operators and vendors' insights. So that should be worked out more and more.
I just wonder if there's potentially ad-supported models, maybe, that you listen to an advert before you get the translation. I don't know, maybe.
Sounds friction. Sounds like adding friction in some ways, that one.
It's true, that is a good point. Sorry, I want to come back to the trust issue, which Brandon mentioned, which is an important one. Maybe, Amy, you could just comment on this quickly. Do you think consumers will necessarily trust the translation itself, that AI will get it right? Because obviously there is a risk if it's an important phone call, say a business transaction, if the translation isn't accurate, that's potentially worrying, right?
I think that consumers they'll go by word of mouth, right? This thing works, I got the result that I wanted, this thing didn't work, I didn't get the result that I wanted, and if it doesn't work, it'll get slated, and if it does, then by word of mouth, it'll work. I think on the enterprise side, like very rightfully so, the enterprises, maybe not the really small ones, but any ones like with any amount of savvy. I know our company is 35 people, and I would be asking this: is what model are you using?
Yeah,
you know,
right.
when are you flipping out the models? How am I going to know when you're changing what the model is? And you know, for sure, you know, operators should be prepared to answer that question.
Yeah. Deniz, on that point, I mean, obviously there's certain languages that AI is very proficient in, but other languages less so. You know, there's a
Like Turkish.
I don't know where Turkish stands actually in the rankings, etc. But that is a key consideration for operators that the models are good enough, right?
Yeah, exactly. It should be good enough. But when I see from the customer point of view, I feel that customers trust the operators and the networks more than the apps or other stuff. So they, of course, there will be enhancements in time, but it can be just tolerated by the customers by saying beta, it will be beta launch, etc. But some languages will be difficult. There are too many languages in Turkey, for example.
Right.
So it will be difficult to just enhance to every step, but it will learn and be trained in time.
Yeah.
But this is actually a point where I think operators have a strong role for differentiation, again, from competitors. And so, you know, a real world example of this is on the Orange stand, they have a demo of it, is that they've started doing like it's in-app, right? So it's not IMS. Like local dialect and languages, like voice versions to interact with their mobile app and with their mobile money service. And so they've rolled it out for like local languages in Senegal and other African countries. And they developed those language models themselves because they did not exist.
Yeah. And that's a good point. Operators are often much more local than the big internet giants.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's good. Brandon, I just want to check any other technical considerations, particularly around integrating AI with IMS, that operators should be aware of if they're starting from scratch.
Well, not a technical challenge, but I'll go back to the trust issue, right? So it's like trust but verify. So one of the things that I think operators are always good at is the telemetry, right? If you go into telco networks, there's lots of telemetry. And I think one of the values in this, what we've been thinking of, is that we have to build these observability frameworks for AI. So if the translation is working, how do we prove that with metrics? And so, you know, what was the latency? What was the accuracy rate? For businesses, retention is probably going to be a key. So I think those are some of the aspects that when we're launching from an operator's perspective, we need to think about that right out the gate.
Yeah. Have that in design from the start.
It's in the design, yeah.
Right, let's talk a little bit about the decision-making process. I'm going to start with you, Deniz. So you've got a choice of putting AI into the network yourself and basically being vertically integrated, or maybe working with an open AI or a different provider and doing it that way. What do you see as the pros and cons in each case?
I think there are many pros and cons. The public side will be more generic. I mean, it will be used by many other customers and operators, but it will be, the cost will be just difficult to manage in the future. And also the security and latency will be really critical issues on top of that. So especially in Turkey, while we were talking about the challenges, we have really hard regulations and strict regulations in many areas regarding security steps, etc. We usually prefer hosted site at this time.
Yeah, okay, so there's actually regulatory requirements around that you need to meet.
That's the, mandatory stuff for us. But in Turkey, it's also started to have public cloud in just close time. But even in such sensitive services, I believe that hosted will be more will be more correct decision for us.
Okay, Amy, there's an important angle here around tech sovereignty. It's obviously a big issue right now with the geopolitical situation, etc. Potentially, this operators doing this in-house essentially helps with that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it depends on their degree of capability, right, and the market that they're in. Obviously, in some markets it doesn't really matter, and in some markets telcos just won't have the skills to do it in-house, or there won't be like a good in Europe, for instance, there's a big shift towards sovereignty, and so we're seeing a lot of AI partners that telcos can work with, or more of them starting to grow up in Europe, and that telcos can work with as partners. But in other markets, that are smaller, it's going to be a little bit harder. And so I think operators are going to have to balance a little bit, and it comes back to a little bit how they market it, and not every operator will be able to play on trust that way because they just won't have the skills to do it or have a local partner to do it with.
Yeah, you need to almost apply pragmatism to the whole sovereignty concept.
Yeah, exactly. It's your question about it might still be worth partnering internationally and taking that risk, especially with a more consumer market, in order to be able to differentiate your service.
Yeah, right, okay. Brandon, let's hear from you on that. So your operator customers, when they're weighing up conversational AI, what are the decisions, what are the questions are they asking themselves?
Yeah, I think they start with like, hey, the OpenAIs of the world have some good models, let's kick the tires there. But they're thinking long term, I have to think about cost, right? And if I'm paying the meter, right, pay per usage cost, but then on the way I charge it is probably going to be flat monthly, either included in a plan, add-on, step up, just free.
Yeah.
Then that cost side can get very unwieldy long term. There's definitely the data sovereignty aspects which concern them. And so I think those two things kind of really tilt toward on-premise, long term. And it's a construct that operators are familiar with. They can build the capacity, they understand the call models, they know how many translated sessions, it's a known cost, it's a known business model. And then dealing with the hosted brings a lot of unknowns, which is risk.
Just talking about the cost side of it, is most of in that model you're describing, is most of the cost up front essentially, and then the operating costs are relatively low, is that?
Well, in the hosted model, it's not as much upfront cost because you're not buying GPUs and things and putting them in your cloud, but you are running the meters, that taxi meter effect, right? That you're going to deal with the hosted guys long term. So taxis can be convenient unless you use a taxi every day.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
So just a few trips around town, you're okay. So we think initially we can do hosted to kick the tires, POCs, does the use case work and things like that. We see some operators do that. But long term, we do see the desires like to bring the AI in network for data sovereignty, and maybe they have to do it. And the other is that cost structure, that they know how to operate. If I buy the capacity, put it inside the network, and then I can align it with my revenue model, which is going to be flat.
Yeah.
They're not going to do usage-based pricing because people won't use it if it's usage-based. We think that's what we keep hearing from our
Okay, you think that's...
Yeah, it's dead on arrival if they start charging per minute to use translation services.
Okay, yeah.
We call that the taximeter effect.
That's interesting that you're so sure about that. That's across the world, right?
Across the world. I mean, that's what we hear, so they've got me convinced.
Okay, fair enough. Deniz, let's talk about where you get started. Essentially, what's the low-hanging fruit? If you wanted to do this, if you wanted to get into this market incrementally, where would you start?
Actually, from timing point of view, I think it should be as soon as possible, because you asked about the OTTs competition in Turkey, and OTTs are enhancing with AI features a lot. So we observed that the voice has started to decrease after some AI components in WhatsApp, for example. So, okay, it's very slight difference, but it started. So whenever people just get used to that usage, it can affect the operator side.
Right.
So I think timing should be as soon as possible from my point of view. And it's a very new thing for the operator side. So we can just spend years to monetize, to make the right model, etc. But timing should be very soon, because and it should be in phases. Just start with some POCs, friendly users, then you can go to the market and see what will be affecting the customers more in the customer experience view. So it should be an agile method, I believe, and start as soon as possible.
Interesting. So the urgency's there. Let's talk about the go-to-market case here. Amy, would you start with a few pilots with enterprises? How would you get going on this? Or would you go with a big bang?
I think, I'm completely with Deniz that I think that, urgency is key, because whatever operators do on their own voice channels, this is coming to all of the apps, now, yesterday. I saw on the Google stand, they've got their voice customer experience model for customer contact centers, and that launched 2 months ago, and they've got Bouygues on the stand saying that we're testing it, right? So I think that urgency is key to get things started, and if you can go the T-Mobile way, I would give it a go, and that gives you a really good understanding of how it works, and that then I would probably in tandem. I think that operators have a better chance of making money out of businesses. So then I would choose about the 2 or 3 business cases that you really develop for enterprise and start building that in for enterprises, because I think that it will become table stakes in the consumer space reasonably quickly.
So you need.
Maybe I'm like, that's my guess. Anyone can disagree with me, but that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting right now. So I try to monetize with enterprise because I think that's where the revenue will come from. And so pick your use cases to develop there.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound like there's a great deal of time for a sort of phased, gradual approach. You need to kind of get on with it.
Well, I think that with enterprises, it's like there is a little bit more time, right? Because you're trying to make them buy something. You're talking about the use case of like your sort of small business assistant that takes your phone calls. Like, it's going to take a while to convert those businesses and to get them on. So there is a little bit of room, but I think what the Big Bang does is that it helps operators to understand, how does this technology actually work in practice? Is it actually scalable? What are the challenges of scaling? So that when you get that with your paying enterprise customers, you've solved those problems.
Yeah.
You can do that quickly. You can move quickly when they're ready to move, and you have those proof points for them.
Yeah, okay, good advice. Brandon, historically, telcos have moved too slowly in many cases and have lost markets they probably should have held on to. Is there a risk that might happen in this context?
Always a risk that they move too slow, but we have seen the appetite, I think, from Deniz and Amy and what she's hearing out there, that operators, I think, want to move very fast, but you also want to do it right. So it's move fast, do it right. Maybe it's a crawl, walk, run, but crawl, walk, run fast.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think what we see is like start with the first use case, do some trials, work out the kinks, get the user experience right. And I think once we learn how to use AI as an industry, right, the life cycle management, how we do the training, how we get the user experience right, how we get the observability metrics right, we'll kind of build the means and methods, and the use cases will accelerate. But it's getting on that journey. It's very much similar, I look at the cloud journey for operators.
Right.
That was kind of a big transition to start operating with cloud, but now once operators are using with cloud, the pace is picking up, and we start seeing that ramp up. And I expect to see the same thing with AI.
They've got to build the internal skill sets.
You got to build the skill sets. You got to get comfortable with it. How do people trust it? How do you get it right? And after first couple of use cases, I think we'll get our legs underneath us as an industry, and it'll start accelerating.
Okay. We've only got a few minutes left, guys, so a little bit of crystal ball gazing, 2026, 2027. I'm going to start with you, Deniz. Just essentially, how fast do you think this market will develop in that time frame?
Actually, it's every day. It's increasing. The demand is increasing, and as Amy told, the OTT and other players are also evolving very fast. Even this year, it was more solid use cases compared to last year. So in each operator and vendor stand, I see such use cases. It's really increasing more solid, and it's not only just imagine. It's really there right now. So it will be very quick time for this year and next year. So that's why I believe that it will be important to adapt soon.
Okay, got it. Amy, if we're sitting here in 2 years' time in these very seats, what sort of market will we be looking at, do you think?
Yeah, what I think is that the things that didn't exist at all before will go faster. For instance, we've never had translation in the middle of a phone call, and so you're not displacing any user behavior, and so I think those will go fast. I think the ones that will take a little bit longer and in 2 years may still be on the earlier side than mass adoption are the ones where you're actually displacing an existing flow, right? So, I think the things like, I'm planning my admin for the week ahead or my travel for the week ahead, and I can just, speak to my assistant and they do it all, and they get it in my calendar and they get it in my email, and they do this, that, and the other. Like, I have a way of doing that.
Right, yeah.
And it's going to take a lot for me to change how I do that. It's going to take a lot for the mass market to change how they do that.
Yeah, in some cases people might feel their existing methods aren't broken, so why
exactly,
fix it? Right.
Exactly. If it ain't broke, then why fix it? But if it's like not displacing something, it's just brand new, I think that will scale more quickly.
Got it. Brandon, I've only got about 30 seconds to hear from you, but 2026, 2027?
I think it's going to go fast. I've seen a huge appetite from the operator community. I think there's a lot of excitement that this is truly a way to add value to the consumer base, get more adoption on operator services, and for the first time I think they see the light of how we can actually monetize the IMS network and generate incremental revenue. So I think it's a strong draw, and we see a lot of excitement from the engineering folks, the product folks, the marketing folks. So everybody's kind of on the same page, it seems, that we haven't really seen before. So I'm pretty excited about it, what it could be here even this time next year.
Okay, sounds like this was a very timely discussion. So thank you for your insights, thank you for the time, and thank you to you, the audience, and thank you to the online audience as well. That's a wrap. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
you.